This is track 2 of the Toxicity of Environmentalism.
You have quite a few comments there. I depict the environmentalists as the bad guys because they are. They say they're wishing for the death of 1 billion people. They relish the thought of human beings being eaten by alligators. They're trying to destroy the human standard of living. And they have to advocate that if one thinks that a jungle is intrinsically valuable and man is clearing the jungle, then he's destroying a value. And man is doing this all the time and does it more by virtue of his nature. So it's not accidental. And the corporations, with obvious exceptions, but fundamentally, in principle, the corporations are the good guys. They are offering things that people want, that they value, and the way they make a profit and grow rich, apart from government intervention, subsidies, and so forth, in a free market, the way they grow rich is by offering better and less expensive, equally good but less expensive products. Now, an objective value is not an intrinsic value. The objective refers to an inescapably existing relationship between human beings and external facts. The objective is something which is in fact of benefit to human life. Food is objectively of value to human life. We must have food to live. Clothing, shelter, etc. Reason, knowledge, science, these are objectively of value. An objective value is anything which can be demonstrated as causally promoting human life and well-being. That's an objective value. An intrinsic value, in contrast, is a value which cannot be connected in any way to the promotion of human life and well-being, which is just supposed to be valued because, without any explanation. The economic system improves the air too. Clean air is for sale in limited context, like if you're in a submarine, on a spaceship, an airplane, or whatever. But you see, the individual, we have to adopt a standard by which the individual is responsible for the effects of his actions, for the perceptible effects of his actions. Now, the stock in trade of the environmentalists is to concentrate on cases where the individual does not produce any perceptible negative effect, but where some noticeable negative may arise as the result of the cumulative actions of many individuals. And then they want to prohibit the individuals. Now, when the individuals are left free, the actual effect is, among other things, to improve the quality of the air. If you want to look at air pollution in large towns and cities is less today than in the past, in large measure thanks to the automobile replacing the horse. We no longer have animal waste. Yes, that's by the free enterprise system. The free enterprise system developed the automobile. We no longer have human waste in the streets, as was the case until the 1840s, before you could have low-cost iron and steel pipe. The water is safer. The air you and I actually experience, when it's bitter cold out, the air in which we are living and working is nice and warm. Our air quality is better. When it's roasting out, our air can be cooler. That's better air. We have modern ventilation. We have humidifiers. That's better air. Now, it's true that there are some big cities where the air is markedly inferior to the open country, and that needs improvement. The main thing I think that would improve it would be the development of atomic power. But the environmentalists oppose that. But in any case, you cannot take the fact that the air might be a little cleaner or dirtier or whatever and say to get the clean air, we have to overthrow industrial civilization. People are willing to live in pretty bad air to have many other advantages in a major city. I remember once when New York was actually a civilized city worth living in, I grew up there, and on a hot summer day in the 40s, you could sometimes feel a little tiny particle perhaps stinging your cheek. No one really thought very much about that because the other advantages of living in a place like New York were so overwhelmingly greater. And we don't even have to have such problems. You don't have them except in a handful of the very largest, most congested cities. But
Okay,
it's
can we move
certainly
on,
no
please?
reason to
We
overthrow
have too
civilization.
many people waiting that can
Okay.
stay till 11:30 to finish.
All right.
It's been an interesting talk, and I appreciate your sincere intent to promote reason. Part of the elements of reason I look for are arguments of internal consistency and coherence. Unfortunately, I haven't found it in your presentation. For instance, your desire to turn environmentalism on its head because of maybe 10% of the people talking in the environmental movement advocating inhuman tendencies can also be found in capitalism. I would argue that as many as 50% of those who control capital in this country have total disregard for the bulk of humanity.
Okay. Now,
I've got a few more points to make. I've been rather patient here.
well, you see, it's not your place to be patient or not.
I understand. Just a
Yeah.
few more points here. The other thing is that your whole sense of longevity in the population has come about from government planning for public health, for roads, sewers, sanitation systems, and modern vaccines and water treatment. So again, your arguments fail on consistency and coherence. The other points that you've made against science is that they're based off of statistics. Yet quantum mechanics, which led to nuclear power, which you apparently support, is also based on statistics and probability theory. The last point that I would like to say is your condemnation of the Greens and your view of them as promoting centralized state planning. I am a Green. I belong to Green organizations. I have not read of any of this in the Green literature of organizations that call themselves Green. Where I've read it is in the corporate Green literature that's trying to condemn the Green movement. So it's propaganda on its part. The Greens I work with promote decentralism in both economic spheres and political spheres. And anybody who's interested in reducing the domination we have in our society, in promoting political decentralism, in promoting economic decentralism, is certainly welcome to join the Greens. We enter into debate,
Okay,
we look for
I think
common
we've
ground.
heard the questions enough. This is certainly not a recruiting platform for the Greens. Now, let me answer your various comments. You say I refer to 5 or 10% of the environmental movement, and I extrapolate from that to the rest of the movement. I do so not on the basis of statistics, but on the basis of causality. The views of that 5 or 10% are logically necessarily the views of the rest of the committed Greens on the basis of their acceptance of the doctrine of intrinsic value. If one believes that blades of grass have intrinsic value, then when human beings walk, they're destroying the good. When human beings kill flies, they're destroying something with intrinsic value. Every time we're doing anything, we're destroying intrinsic values. The doctrine of intrinsic value by its nature is anti-human. That is the essential basis on which I say the environmental movement is toxic at the level of at least several parts per 10. Now, you then refer to vaccines, sewage treatment, etc., and you treat these things as the product of government action. Well, you ignore how we managed to get the capacity to produce sewer lines, how we produced vaccines. Edward Jenner, the inventor of the smallpox vaccine, was not a government employee. People do not go to their physicians for inoculation against smallpox, diphtheria, typhoid, etc. They were not doing this because of the government. They were doing it because of advances in private medicine and pharmaceutical devices. That's why they did it. Now, it happens in many jurisdictions. The government has assumed the monopoly control over sewage lines and roads. Well, the roads that could be constructed by Charlemagne, or he couldn't construct any kind of sewers. George I, II, and III couldn't construct sewers. When capitalism produced the iron and steel pipe, and the materials for building roads, concrete roads and so forth, and the government is monopolizing these things, then it happened the government put on the final touch and did them. But it's not the government, it's the capitalist economic system. Now, you may find all kinds of individual capitalists who are up to no good. A defense of the philosophy of capitalism is not a defense of individual capitalists. The notion that capitalism and the capitalists as an economic function are one and the same, that's some nonsense foisted on the world by Marx. Capitalism is an economic system based on private ownership of the means of production, in which individuals pursue their material self-interest under freedom, and in which the culture is dominated by reason. That is capitalism. Now, you may find all kinds of individuals who are doing bad things, but capitalism is a system in which the government is limited to protecting the rights of individuals from the initiation of force. That's capitalism. Whatever you're complaining about, if it's a legitimate complaint, is the result of a violation of capitalism. And environmentalism is a collectivist movement, and you can see it in practically all of the measures they advocate. Every government restriction, like the plans to reduce global carbon dioxide emissions. Now here we are, we have individuals. Individuals look at their own self-interest, they go by their own judgment, what will serve their well-being. So they want to buy electricity, they want to buy automobiles, gasoline, etc., etc. Each of the individuals is out to improve himself. It's against the law for him to attempt to do that by force, against the law to attempt to do so against the well-being or life or property of anyone else. Any actions with others have to have their voluntary consent. So individuals go ahead, they benefit themselves, they benefit others in the process. Now here come the environmentalists, and they say, just like the communists, they say, you hundreds of millions of stupid people, you don't know what's in your self-interest. If we leave you alone, each acting on your puny individual reason, you'll destroy yourselves. So we're going to stop you, all of you hundreds of millions, from doing what you think is to your self-interest, and we're going to impose our cockamamie plan on you, which we think we can predict global warming, so we're going to stop you from having a refrigerator, which you perceive as being of benefit to you, because we think we can stop global warming by stopping you from having a refrigerator. Now, I thought the world was getting over that. They threw these people out in Eastern Europe just recently. Why bring them back?
Ah, got a second. Thank you. If we could keep moving
Over
on.
here, yes.
Just like to take a second, first of all, to apologize for the heckling of some of my peers, which doesn't help anybody.
Thank you.
And instead of following some of the tacks that have been taken so far and questioning your facts that you've presented, which are questionable at best, I'd rather go for the heart of your presentation. In evaluating your doctrine of intrinsic value, you said that the environmentalist movement holds minimal or worthless the value of human life, especially when compared against that of other species.
That's logically implied. Now, they don't say that consistently. They have a lot of sugarcoating.
Meanwhile, in your quote by Paul Ehrlich, the end of his quote said that he didn't want this entire global warming thing, whatever, to impede agricultural production. Agricultural production for the consumption by people, for the good of people. This brings me to my point, which is that everything that you have said so far today that proves supposedly that environmentalism is against progress is a farce. Essentially, environmentalism and laissez-faire capitalism are two ways of going about progress. It's the ends we have in common, the means that we do not have in common.
Okay, well, if you think that laissez-faire capitalism is the means of achieving the goals of environmentalism, and you are not prepared to initiate force or fraud against anyone, then I wish you the very best of luck. You are no danger to me or to anyone else. I think you're profoundly mistaken. I think such a view is totally illusory. Let me say, in connection with your discussion of Ehrlich, yes, in that paragraph, Ehrlich talks about decline in agricultural productivity, and you could read that passage as he's pro-agricultural productivity. No one can be anti-human life consistently, or even perhaps most of the time. It's enough that they're that way a good part of the time or any of the time. Now, Ehrlich, in that same book, also at greater length, denounces what he calls death control. And he's against spending money on controlling the diseases of middle age. That, I think, is more significant. The fact that Ehrlich might have a good word to say about agricultural productivity would not help someone who can't have a disease cured because of the influence of his philosophy. You know, Hitler had a dog whom he petted once in a while and whom he probably gave cookies to. And maybe he brought flowers to his mother. That does not make such a person of a good character. It does not change anything of any significance.
Okay, I have a few points, and you can address them each individually if you like. You were expounding upon the relative triviality of pointing out one death in a million for a relative product, but with each death comes several hundred cases, closer to death, and several thousands of mild sickness, and you were totally neglecting that. I was really disappointed about that.
I'm sorry, you say with each what comes?
You say that one death in a million is not so bad, and it is only one death in a million. There are things you haven't considered, such as the many hundreds of serious illnesses corresponding to each one death, statistically.
Okay. Now, first of all, let me say, I guess you're referring to the Allor type example.
Yes.
I don't for a moment even believe that there is in fact one death in a million. I also pointed out that it's impossible ever to get two groups of a million people, have all things the same. One eats apples with Allor, the other doesn't, and then over 70 years, 4.2 of the one group dies. That's nonsense. There's no scientific basis for claiming single-digit death rates caused by all of these different things. A genuine cause does not operate a few times in a million. It will operate almost every time in a million. I think that all of these claims about Allor, this or that chemical, they're fundamentally just not true. And now, it may be that there are things we have to do that cannot avoid death, but the alternative would be much, much worse. If we're going to get up and get out of bed, each day that people get up and get out of bed, some of them are going to be run over. Now, you couldn't say, well, we have to avoid that risk. That's nonsense. You have to always look at the alternatives.
Okay. This is an acceptable risk then, a few illnesses or even possibly one death per million. You would say this is an acceptable death.
If the alternative were more, yes.
Or the alternative not much different.
Well, if the alternative is not, then you'd have to show that something is the cause. The idea of one death in a million, something like Allor cannot cause one death in a million. It's not a cause. There's no proof. It's pure mysticism. It's arbitrary assertion.
I never mentioned Allor.
Pardon me?
I didn't mention Allor.
But you're referring to that example, things which are comparable to it. Pardon me? Well, I think it's been established that it does.
Well,
no, I think it's more than statistics now. And certainly, I think, well, there's evidence that the tissue of smokers is different, the lung tissue. Pardon me? No, I said that there's evidence to show that their tissue is damaged. Yes, let me get to the next question. Thank you for reminding me.
I'm going to approach it, I guess, opposite the guy who was just in front of me, because I'm going to
I'm sorry, I've had trouble.
I'm going to attack your factual basis. First of all, you mentioned that half the chemicals in the environment cause cancer when tested. Do you have the data for those tests?
Yes, the data.
Half the chemicals in the environment you have data for.
No, just a moment. No one, you don't have the results for anything that you claim. You don't have a laboratory.
Anything.
But I can tell you where to get the data. The data is from Professor Bruce Ames, and if you'll bear with me for a moment, I may be able to cite the actual article.
Well, just wait a minute. Just a moment.
Yes, the article is "What are the major carcinogens in the etiology of human cancer?" in V.T. DeVita Jr., S. Hellman, and S.A. Rosenberg, editors. Important Advances in Oncology, 1989.
Yeah,
Philadelphia, J.B. Lippincott Company, pages 241F.
I'm familiar with the study.
Well, so, why do you challenge it? You're familiar with it.
This is why I'm challenging you.
No.
Excuse me. This is why I'm challenging you. Did they test every chemical?
I think they tested every chemical that has been tested. They've tested thousands of chemicals, and of all the thousands, the average is 50-50.
The point
Now,
I'm
if what
making-
you're doing is
No, the
saying,
point, can I make my point?
just a moment. If you're trying to base something on the idea, well, maybe there are a few chemicals they haven't tested.
No.
How can I say
No,
50-50?
I'm fundamentally
That's so
attacking your suppositions on scientific method, that you state that half the chemicals in the environment cause cancer. You can't support that because obviously nobody's tested half the
No,
chemicals
I don't
in
say
the
that. I
environment.
quote Professor Bruce Ames. I refer to Professor Bruce
Predictably,
Ames
you
who
quote
says
him.
that. If you wish, you can attack Professor Ames.
Well, I
Now,
also
it's really peculiar. You say, you demand that before we could say something about half the chemicals, each and every last chemical has been tested. Seems to me you apply a very peculiar double standard. You're supporting the general position which is prepared to destroy the industrial system of the modern world on the basis of totally
How do you know
unsupported
I'm
wild
supporting that?
conjectures. You're supporting a
This is
doctrine.
the whole fundamental premise of your argument. You have attributed these grand ideas and motives on behalf of everyone in what you've termed this overall environmental movement. I think there's a lot of diversity in the environmental movement. I would be very careful.
I explicitly said that the rank and file, the great majority of
And
the
you know
rank and
each
file
one?
of the environmental movement are composed of people who think they're in it for some particular individual good purpose.
And Hitler said the
But
same
the
thing about
philosophical
Jews.
meaning,
They're all
the
the same.
philosophical meaning of a call for the death of 1 billion people, for seeing a human being eaten alive by an alligator, for attempting to destroy the basis of modern society, for destroying modern industry, and you're quibbling with me about whether or not each and every chemical has been tested.
Because you state
should
that
be
we need
to
good
support a
science, and then
position of this
you
kind.
easily go to and make statements that aren't factually supported. And I just
They
say, be
are
careful.
factually supported.
Thank you for
I
coming to the
quoted
University of Michigan.
Ehrlich, I quoted Graeber and McKibben, and I've shown you in logic. And let me say it again. Human beings regard rattlesnakes, coyotes, rats, fleas, etc., as vermin because they systematically destroy human values, food supplies, sources of clothing. We value these things in the name of our life and well-being. The environmentalists have chosen to value deserts, swamps, rock formations, various species that have no value to human beings. And man is constantly disturbing the environment as he moves. And by that standard, the environmentalists regard man as the systematic destroyer of their values. So they hate him. Now, I think they actually hate him before that, but that's what they're saying, and that view implies hatred.
I've got a couple of brief questions that I think come back to a little bit about what it seems your perception as a rationalist of what the world will be 10, 15, 20, 500 years from now will be versus what an environmentalist will be. It seems that you have a fundamental disagreement with the scientific method, as has already been mentioned by someone else earlier.
I do not have a disagreement with the scientific method.
Please let me finish.
I believe the environmentalists ignore it.
That you disagree with the concept of intrinsic value, which you've expounded on, and that you also believe that resources are infinite, and that in the fact that resources are infinite, that we have, as the Western nation of the United States of America, have the infinite capability for technological innovation and development, but you never seem to address at what cost. It may be of benefit to the United States, it may be of benefit to the white males of the United States, since that seems to be the target population that you keep referring to. You keep referring to those in the enlightened self-interest, and as well as speaking of men continually, but you never talk about at what cost an economic gain is made in the United States versus an economic loss in the third world for profit in the United States. I don't see the United States as being the only nation 500 years down the road from now.
Okay, I thank you for your question. You have some interesting observations which definitely need addressing. You raised first a question about infinite resources. I assume you have in mind the idea that we'll run out of natural resources sooner or later if we have continuous technological progress. Is that part of your idea? That there's a danger of running out of natural resources?
Most of technological change as it takes place right now, is based on the utilization of pure resources. There's very little technological innovation that deals with recycling of already used resources. Comments have already been made about the laws of thermodynamics.
All right. Now let me just say about resources. Nature, in one sense, provides vastly more than people are aware of, and in another sense, much, much less. What nature provides is matter and energy. It provides matter in all of its elemental forms. But this is not yet usable, economically usable or economically accessible natural resources. All of the iron and coal and whatever was available in the world of the Stone Age as is available now. It was not an economic natural resource. Human beings create the goods character of chemical elements. They create the goods character of natural resources through scientific and technological advances, establishing what's good for what can be done with different things. How do you get at it without having to use too much labor? We enlarge the supply of usable, accessible natural resources as we improve our understanding and physical power over the world. When we could only dig with picks and shovels, the supply of usable, accessible iron and coal was very minimal. When we can dig with steam shovels and dynamite, it's greater. If we have a commercial breakthrough with extracting oil from shale, we'll radically enlarge the supply of usable, accessible petroleum. If we have a commercial breakthrough in hydrogen fusion, that's the most abundant element in the universe. This is not a fundamental problem. Now, when you talk about what cost, there is virtually no cost. The technological progress is practically a pure gain, at least 99 and 44/100%. It's enabling people to do more. It's enabling people to do more with less effort, less fatigue. The effect on people in the rest of the world, apart from government intervention and controls, is to benefit them. Let me give you an example from my own United States. Please, just a moment. I've heard your question. I'm trying to answer it. You can understand the effect on people in the rest of the world of the exploitation of their natural resources by looking within the borders of the United States and ask, what is the effect on the people of Minnesota of the fact that iron ore is taken from the Mesabi Range and shipped to the rest of the country? Do the people of Minnesota lose by that or gain? Now, I think they gain. Now, the next gentleman here.
Professor Reisman,
Yeah.
we share the same last name, but not many of the same ideas here.
Okay.
I believe, I'm going to argue this from the point of laissez-faire economics, actually.
All
I believe environmentalism is a logical branch of laissez-faire economics. Economic theory is based on the allocation of scarce goods under these constraints. But you talk about the rearrangement of elements of scarcity, but what you're ignoring here is the secondary effects of this rearrangement, that is the externalities of this rearrangement. Also, you seem to propose full development overlooking the scarcity of our natural resources. Producers right now aren't paying for the scarcity, and that's a major failure in the laissez-faire economic system. Secondly, laissez-faire economics is based on perfect information and enforcement of a good market system. You poked fun at the California Office of Environmental Advocacy, but you know it has a role as a defender of these uninformed workers, of uninformed consumers about corporate greed.
Okay.
Until there's perfect information, we will need government regulation because people just are not informed what's going on. People are not informed. For instance, right now people are dumping, corporations are dumping toxics into the Detroit River, a source of drinking water, and people do not know who's doing this. And our economic system, laissez-faire economics, does not address this issue. Therefore, I believe environmentalism is a logical branch of laissez-faire economics addressing the weaknesses of it.
Okay. All right, now you have a number of points again. You refer to scarcity of resources. I think there is no intrinsic scarcity of resources. Expanding knowledge, the growth of human knowledge from generation to generation, which is possible if each generation is properly educated and then does its own fresh thinking, the stock of human knowledge will grow. That makes possible the development of better forms of equipment, more effective equipment. We gain greater knowledge of and power over the physical world, so we increase the supply of economically usable, accessible resources as we go. I think I basically answered that with the preceding question. Now, when you talk about externalities, this is the stock in trade of the environmentalists, or one of it. And what the environmentalists attempt to do is to stop individuals from acting on the grounds of these alleged side effects of their actions. Now notice it's a very peculiar category of case. Under the common law, if you do something which is destructive to the personal property of another person, you can be stopped under the common law. Let me give you this example. Suppose you want to construct a building. Now, why do you construct the building? You construct the building because you expect to gain. Under capitalism, if you want people to work for you, if you want people to supply you, if you want people to buy or rent your building, it will have to be to their advantage too. You can't use force against them. If your construction threatens the personal property of anyone else, that person can get an injunction against you and stop it until you arrange some deal with him. Now, the environmentalists single out a case in which the individual cannot be shown to do any perceptible harm to anybody. There's no third party who can claim his building is being damaged by the construction of yours, or that he's a passerby in danger. That's not their case. Their kind of case is they will take the actions of enormous numbers of individuals, none of whom as individuals are doing anything wrong. But collectively, there may be some negative effect. A good example might be the development of the American Midwest. Hundreds of thousands of people moved west. They cleared vast quantities of land. All that clearing of land probably contributed something to raising the floodplain of the Mississippi River down in New Orleans. Now, you could say the collective result of this mass movement was there's this externality, a side effect. No one individual farmer is responsible, in my judgment. Since no individual farmer is responsible, no individual farmer should be stopped. But I believe that the environmentalists, had they been around when the Midwest was being developed, they would have argued that the settlement should be stopped because of its negative environmental impact, raising the floodplain of the Mississippi. That's an externality. Well, I don't think that that doctrine holds water. I think we have to hold individuals responsible for their own actions, not for negatives that result from the collective to which they belong. There may be such negatives, but then I think the remedy is to allow individuals to be free and to then deal with those negatives as they arise.
Can't you divide the negatives amongst the individuals? I mean, say this amount is being damaged, therefore you are responsible for this amount, you're responsible for this amount.
No, you see, I think when an individual's action by itself is not responsible for anything, the individual should be left free to act. Otherwise, you're yoking the individual to the collective. Well, if you say everyone slightly poisons the river and then it's totally dead, is that okay? If you can show that there's any perceptible damage, there would be some perceptible damage at some point. Let's say we have a certain amount of people disposing wastes into the river. There's no perceptible effect. Then I think some more will have some effect, and that can be shown. Now, if it truly could not be shown, then I think if truly the effect, you can't show that any individual is responsible, I think the fundamental principle following which will be much less damaging is leave the individuals free, find another way to deal with the problem.
How about perfect information? You failed to address that.
Thank you for reminding me. You say perfect information is one of the essentials of laissez-faire capitalism. I know that that is taught in microeconomics courses under the heading of the pure and perfect competition doctrine. I think the idea is nonsense. Perfect information would mean such a thing as any time someone went to the movies or bought a book, he'd already have had to see the movie or have read the book, because otherwise he lacks vital information. We live in a world where we have certain information, but we're not omniscient. And you cannot say that laissez-faire capitalism or any system requires omniscience.
But
and
people should know when they're being harmed by the environment.
It's doubly absurd to say that because people lack omniscience, The government somehow can supply the deficiency. The government knows less than anybody. And your own example provided support. You said the government around here doesn't even know who's polluting the Detroit River, and even though it's against the law.
But the important thing is people have to know, and the environmental movement has to be that vehicle for people to realize what is happening.
Well, anyone can be available to spread information, but the environmental movement is not a reliable source of information. It's philosophically opposed to human life and well-being. It openly says so. It openly says so. Before I would entertain the notion that that proposition is to be doubted, I would want to have Mr. Graeber publicly apologize. I would like the editors of the Los Angeles Times to apologize for printing his review. I would like Mr. McKibben to apologize. I would like the Sierra Club to disavow that statement of John Muir, and the others to disavow similar statements. I would like to see them positively endorse the value of human life and well-being, endorse reason as man's means of survival, endorse science and technology. After they did all that, and then they've established a long record to show that they really are for human life and well-being and its essential requirements, and then perhaps they say, well, look, here's a dirty river, why can't we do something about it? Then I will be willing to listen. But when we have a group of people who openly proclaim they want to see 1 billion people die, they relish the thought of terror, they lie, they are seeking to throttle our production of energy, they value hostile beasts, they value jungles. When we see that, I can't understand how you people can forget that and want to stand up and be counted with such things. Which of you would like to go marching
Excuse me, Professor, it is getting late. May we please continue with the questions?
Himmler, or under the hammer and sickle with Stalin? How could you want to associate with such people? Where are your souls?
Excuse me, sir, may I now ask my question?
Okay.
Thank you. You have gone from environmentalism and broadened it out to political radicalism, including feminism, determinism, and other such isms, so to speak. And you have referred us to Ayn Rand to be our example to look towards.
Her and Ludwig von Mises. Yes.
Having read Ayn Rand, particularly her novel The Fountainhead, if I remember correctly, in that novel, the environment in the novel is mostly gray. The people are afraid to go out of doors because of poisoning. The men have...
That's a different novel by a different author.
Excuse me, sir, may I please continue?
But it's not The Fountainhead.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
The men have raped the women, and the man, Howard, does continue to rape and beat the woman in the novel. And I would ask you, sir, you have critiqued environmentalism for not caring for people, but in your talk, you have accredited industry and industrial development and capitalism with being valuable. Where do humans fit into your novel, sir, particularly which humans?
All right. Now, you make reference to The Fountainhead, which I think you said you did not read. Am I mistaken in that?
Excuse me?
You said you did not read The Fountainhead.
No, I said I did read The Fountainhead,
You did read
sir.
it. Well, from your description of it, it sounds to me like a different book by a different author. There are one or two scenes. There's one scene which is often referred to as the rape scene. But this is not a genuine rape in the sense that it is something...
Excuse me, sir, what is a genuine rape then?
A genuine rape is a sexual act carried out on a woman or other person against her will. In this particular scene, the heroine wanted what was happening more than anything else in the world. There was violent passion, but it was not against her will. It is certainly not rape. Now, you talk about what kind of people. Those people who are willing to deal with others by means of trade, who are willing to deal with others honestly, who do not want to use physical force to get the cooperation of other people, who are willing to deal with others by means of voluntary consent to mutual benefit. That is the kind of people that are required for capitalism.
Are we then talking about such companies as United Fruit, which happen to blackmail people in the countries of Panama and Costa Rica to work for their businesses? Is that the sort of capitalism we are talking about, sir?
If you can show me any individual who commits blackmail, that I think is a criminal act, should be against the law. That is not capitalism. Capitalism means a system in which the government does nothing but protect the rights of the individual from the initiation of physical force, including fraud. Every action in which individuals initiate the use of physical force, commit murder, robbery, rape, mayhem, fraud, whatever, that represents a violation of the fundamental political philosophical basis of capitalism. I am totally opposed to it. Ayn Rand was totally opposed to it.
Then why does it happen in Ayn Rand's novel?
It doesn't happen by any of the heroes. No hero in Ayn
is
Rand's
the hero
novel
and he does rape
resorted
the
to an
woman.
initiation of force. Again, you're probably referring to the rape scene. I've told you that was not an act of force. Force means doing something against the will of the other party. The physical, the strong emotion, the physical violence of it was not against the party's will. It was not a rape.
I disagree with you, sir.
All right,
but thank
well,
you.
we have to agree to disagree. Thank you.
I am absolutely inspired to know that a person who thinks like you is teaching at a major university in this country, and
Thank
that you
you.
have
Thank you.
and that you have the
Let me
courage
say, this must be an intelligent question.
and that you have the courage to spread that around also. And I'm wondering, do you get combat pay to come to Ann Arbor?
Do I get combat pay?
Okay, basically, I'd like to point out one thing that I think you didn't, and that is that the modern capitalist industrialized world has allowed the free time on the people's hands to create an environmentalist movement and sit around and figure out how to destroy our gains that we have made recently.
Yes, capitalism has created the leisure.
They would not have that time otherwise. And one final statement I'd like to make, and that is I hope all you environmentalists aren't going to drive home tonight.
Thank you. Two more? All right, we have time for two more. Yes, the lady here.
Three more.
Did you say three, Chip? Okay,
I want to respond to what you said about collectivism.
yeah.
You seem to think that reason and collectivism and environmentalism also are mutually exclusive, and that we on the left don't have any major thinkers that have responded to that critique, but that is not true. I just read a book by Murray Bookchin called Remaking Society, in
Tell
which
me
he...
the author's name and spell it.
Murray Bookchin, Bookchin. The book is Remaking Society, and he addresses the very things that you address. He critiques deep ecology for many of the same reasons as yourself, and he also posits that the two are not mutually exclusive, that reason and a good environment can coexist.
Well, I believe reason and a good environment can coexist and do. I believe
Yes, but
that
not
reason
in the
is...
environmental movement.
Right.
You seem to think that these are mutually exclusive.
I think the environmental movement is opposed to reason, yes.
So I wanted to suggest to you that you pick up Murray Bookchin's book,
Well, I'll look
so you
for
can
it.
have a new perspective on that.
So you're saying here's someone who is still on the left, but who is in favor of science and technology?
Yes.
All right, well, that's good to know. I thought that the left had totally collapsed. I'm glad to see that someone there is still holding up some sort of tattered remnant of rationality. Maybe there's hope for him. Well, then I have to qualify that statement.
Hi.
Yes.
Well, I think you're going to get to meet one of those people a little bit sooner, because I'm an engineer, a scientist, and an environmentalist, and
Okay.
I think a rational person.
Okay?
Couple of quick comments.
Yeah.
I think that you could educate yourself on the second law of thermodynamics a little bit better than what you've said, but I don't want to go into that because it's very in-depth. My main point was to kind of bring it to your turf of economics and say that I kind of view the human race as, say, the board of trustees of this planet. And I think what a lot of environmentalists see is that we're spending our capital at a rate greater than our income, basically solar power in a thermodynamic sense, is coming in. And we're sort of casting our vote for a more practical capital plan so that we can keep this planet functioning for human beings at this level or a better level of living for our future generations. And I'd like to see if you think that's completely irrational.
Okay, what you've just said is probably the most rational type of statement most rational kind of face that could be put upon environmentalism. But you see, I don't think that the role of human beings is to be a board of trustees or stewards for the environment. That would mean that human beings are here to tend the welfare of the animals, the rock formations, etc. I think each of us exists as an end in himself, with our own personal happiness as our most important purpose. And I think that nature is here, from our perspective, to serve our ends. And I believe that we succeed progressively and powerfully in doing that by virtue of following our own individual self-interest. We, as individuals, do not squander our capital. The government is squandering our capital through deficits and inflation, through confiscatory taxation. The environmental movement helps to squander our capital by reducing our ability to produce, including to produce capital goods. So I don't think that if the environmentalists wish to say that they really are advocating the long-run self-interest of human beings, I would say, well, that is simply false. That would be at least a respectable position, simply a wrong one. And if they disavowed any association with the desire for mass death, all right. But I don't think it's a correct position.
I think you're against mass death. You're
Yeah,
against mass death, right?
I'm against mass death, and I'm also pro-technology. Obviously, I'm pro-technology.
Okay, so then you have to be against Mr. Graeber, Mr. McKibben, against the publisher, the Los Angeles Times,
May I,
for printing that. You know, just think, you may remember the case of Andy Rooney a few months back or so. I didn't hear what he said exactly, but I know he made some statements which were considered offensive to gays, and he was suspended from his job, and he had, I believe, to publicly apologize. Well, where is there any concern here for denunciations of human life and well-being, calls for mass death? Where are the standards? Why aren't you angry about that? Why aren't you demanding public apologies, proof that these people are in fact in favor of life, technology, reason, and science?
Hi, how are you
doing? Last
doing?
question. Yeah.
Well, I would agree with you on some points that you've made, definitely about deep ecologists and the seemingly spread of misanthropy in certain sectors of the environmental movement.
I missed the last part.
I would agree with you that the spread of misanthropy in the environmental movement of anti-humanism is very lamentable.
Right.
But the question I want to address to you is a bit more philosophical in nature. You say that the doctrine of intrinsic value prima facie excludes human beings because it says that nature has an intrinsic value.
The intrinsic value of nature excludes
human activity. Now, from an ecological perspective, human beings are nature. Therefore, you cannot exclude human beings from intrinsic value in nature because human beings are a part of nature, therefore we too are intrinsically valuable. And that's the root of the philosophy that you're talking about. We do things because we are intrinsically valuable, and human freedom should not be limited because when it's limited, we decrease our intrinsic value. Therefore, you do believe in an intrinsic value of some sort, the intrinsic value of human beings.
I believe that each human being is valuable to him or herself. Each human being is the primary value to him or herself, and other human beings become values to the individual human being by virtue of their supporting the value that each person is to him or herself. I believe that you can hold your spouse or children as values without which your life would be worthless. You can be willing to die to save their lives. I believe you will normally have goodwill toward other people if you perceive them as mutual benefactors whose existence promotes your existence through the sharing of knowledge, through cooperation in the division of labor. But I do not believe that that extends to the animal kingdom.
So therefore you're saying that, in your opinion, real intrinsic value, the intrinsic value of human beings...
I don't use the term intrinsic value. Is not valuable in and of itself. It's valuable because someone might sit on it at some point and do something that he wants to do. But to whom and for what? Nothing is valuable in and of itself except the life of a human being to him or herself. Everything else is a derivative. Now, the environmentalists claim that the external things are intrinsically valuable, that we should value them not because of any connection to our well-being, but just because they are, and that we should actually sacrifice our well-being for their sake, because serving our well-being requires that we disturb them. See, serving our well-being requires that we constantly disturb nature. And if you attach intrinsic value to nature, you must see man as the destroyer of the good.
Well, I believe in intrinsic value for all life, human beings included. I also do not believe in sacrificing oneself for something else, like giving up a good harvest because you don't want to tear up the ground to put in the plants that you want to grow. Mm-hmm. But I think that a real environmentalist would say, well, you're going to want to test the soil and use a varied crop pattern to prevent pests.
And that's what any profit-making farmer will want to do too.
But there are many profit-making farms and agribusinesses that use monocropping and use techniques that deplete soils. And they have been...
It's either those people in free competition will go out of business or they'll learn better.
Well, I hope they do, because otherwise our entire soils in our farm beds are going to be virtually worthless in several years.
Our soils here?
What?
Our soil here in the United States?
Our soil in the United States, the soils all the way around the world.
All right, well then I suggest you and others who share your views start buying up some land and doing what's necessary, and you'll make a great deal of money when that happens. Well, thank you very much.